The year is 1969. The crew of Apollo 11 make their historic landing on the broken surface of the moon. In Paris, North Vietnamese and American diplomats begin the negotiations that will end their bloody and unpopular war. Many things are happening. Meanwhile, in a snowbound field in rural Poland, a man waits anxiously for the arrival of a former colleague and old friend. A celebrity physicist recently returned from a rare trip to America. Over the coming weeks, the pair will spend their days reminiscing and reliving days spent in science labs and lecture halls years ago. But why has this visitor really travelled to this unnamed and dreary backwater? This, of course, is the question at the heart of Krzysztof Zanussi's 1969 film The Structure of Crystal, a slow and melodic meditation on what it might mean to live a happy life, and how we might confront infinity and our own death. Ralph, are crystals a podcaster's best friend?
That was a beautiful intro, Owen.
Cheers, man. I wrote it myself.
Yes, I think crystals, I think the film The Structure of Crystals perfectly crystallizes something that our podcast celebrates in its medium. The medium is the message of two guys chatting about something.
Right, Marshall Lewin.
It's that sort of the way in which I suppose expertise often becomes the prism through which men bond. I think, when I talk about male, it's obviously lots of generalizations and stuff, but just as a feeling, it comes across to me that this film conveys something quite special and not something that many films touch on. It's not a classical theme of films, that centering the tensions and the delights of two guys who've known each other for a very long time and work in the same industry.
It's very much a film in its heart, a fantastic film. This is the first film that I think universally we have lauded and loved and celebrated, and probably
the least well known as well. Probably
least well known, and the least in a lot of ways complicated. This is not a complicated film, really. Its subtlety belies quite deep philosophical musings, but at its heart, it's a film about friendship, and I think it's very important not to lose sight of that. So, obviously, the scene I kind of set out in the introduction, this snowbound field, this beautiful establishing shot of this snowbound field, is where one of the characters, Jan, waits for his friend Marek being the sort of globe-trotting, celebrated, suave, worldly scientist. And Jan used to be a colleague of his. They both were successful scientists in Warsaw. Marek continues to live that life and has achieved great success. He was teaching in Harvard for a while, which would have been very unusual in 1960s Poland. And Jan gave all of that up 5 years ago to become a sort of humble meteorologist in the Polish countryside, in this small, out-of-the-way village, which we learn is a 4-hour drive from Warsaw. And he's adopted this very humble, simple, saint-life existence. And that really is kind of the setup, isn't it? You've got Jan, who is simple and humble and content, but we can explore the idea of contentedness in a bit. And we've got Marek, who sweeps in with his fancy car and his polo neck and his roguish good looks. And kind of the film sets it up as this, would you say, like a kind of almost like an opposition between two kind of complementary but contradictory ways of life?
Yes, I mean, there's a kind of there's a conflict. I mean, all good narratives have conflict, but it's striking when you look at a film as gentle as this one, how the conflicts play out.
Are realised,
on quite a subtle level, yeah. And I think things, I'm conscious with this film that people are less likely to have seen it, so I'm not going to give away spoilers, although I don't really believe in spoilers.
That's a good point. Are we a pro spoiler podcast? I'm assuming, because like, you know, if we were like, if this was the Criterion cast, we would treat the idea of being like careful about spoilers to be really fucking sneaky, and we would just like treat it as like
I'm not sneaky about spoilers, but obviously there are things like The Wire where like it's really annoying if someone tells you when String a Bell or someone, you know, that was a spoiler itself.
Watch yourself.
But you know, like there's it's not a spoiler to say that like the tensions that are reached in this film are kind of like relatively innocuous in other film spaces. You know, a firm word or a kind of stolen glance is about as far as some of these tensions rise to, and in a way that's kind of that's beautiful. It's no less incisive than a more violent film might be, but it you know, it has a softer touch to it. It's easier to watch. It's like a film that if you're feeling a bit stressed out, you know,
it's a very soothing
enjoy
film.
This film. It'll soothe you.
Yeah, because it's got this central kind of tension, this subtle interplay of lifestyles is at the center of this film, as is the friendship. And in a way, Jan and Marek embody two different ways of life and two different trajectories that their lives have taken. But the film doesn't kind of use them as empty vessels to kind of explore existential contrasts. They're not like, this man is A, this man is B. It's actually a lot more subtle than that. Because that is true. You know, Marek is worldly and impatient and ambitious, and Jan is not those things. He's content. And obviously Marek throughout the film probes and prods Jan's happiness. He constantly questions, you know, in a very direct way. He calls his life banal. He questions Jan's interest in the locals who live in the village. He's quite scathing about them. He keeps saying, these are the best years of your life. You know, he's very confrontational to Jan, you know, sort of saying, you're wasting your talent. Obviously, we get the impression that Jan is, you know, an equally brilliant scientist, perhaps more so in a lot of ways. But this kind of central tension, it doesn't kind of just set them up as these two completely contradictory elements, because there's a real fondness and like this underswell, this groundswell of emotion and feeling between the two men. Like they really do get on, and there's some lovely moments in the first kind of half an hour of the film where they're just kind of like hanging out. You know, they're kind of making faces in the mirror and like playing games and racing each other in the snow and pointing at each other's bald spots. It's like, it's rare to see that even in like a kind of very modern film, a male bond and relationship shown in these very easy, casual, kind of, in a way, like platonically romantic ways. Like it's a really loving friendship. I don't think I've ever seen that in a film before, where I've felt like a male bond was shown in that depth, while still retaining like Zanussi's overarching like intellectual argument. It's amazing that it manages to do both. Could you like talk us through like, I'll be Jan, you be Marek. How about that?
You're the one wearing the glasses, so it makes sense, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm thinking. And I live in Wood Green, which is
and I
noticeably much. Yeah. So I'm actually in remote Poland. Yeah, go for it.
Next time we hang out, we should race. We should do. I was thinking that when I watched them race each other in the snow. It's like I haven't done it for ages to just race someone, because you actually don't know. You and I, we have quite similar sort of builds, don't we? So it'd be.
Yeah, I'm fucking fast though.
Hard to. Are you?
We'll see. Yeah, we'll see. Yeah. So tell me about Marek's kind of worldview and personality, and his kind of objections to Jan's lifestyle.
He sees ambition as an obvious drive. He's been to Harvard. Yeah, he's been to Harvard and contributed to studies there. He's seen some of the West. I mean, this is an element of historical context we can give. Obviously, this film was made during the communist era of Poland, and it's a rare case of a story made in Poland that shows someone having gone to the West and come back. And there's nothing at all polemical about the way that's presented either way.
It's almost positive in a way.
Yeah, but it's sort of presented as it is, you know. he's gone to the West, he's flourished in a certain kind of way, but it's also alienated him from his home, or it's created a tension between him and someone from where he's from, which is a natural observation about what happens when people take different life paths. But it's interesting, there's one line in particular towards the end where he says, it makes me sick to see a man like you living like a pensioner. That's
he's
about
obsessed with his age.
Yeah, that's about as far. And I don't know, it seems like almost projection in a way. Like, why would you be so concerned with someone else, how they use their time? But there is.
Whereas Jan.
Jan.
Yeah, go on. Sorry.
No, go on.
Jan kind of deflects
these.
Jan. Yeah, Jan is incredibly content, and he's comfortable enough with his decisions in his life that he is not a prototype for his way of life. He's not a preacher. He's not kind of abandoned civilization. He is simply content, and he's extremely comfortable with his humbler, simpler way of life, because he kind of smirks and smiles when Marek makes his claims and arguments. He doesn't get angry with him. There's no point where he gets angry with him. He kind of smiles knowingly. He knows what Jan is trying to do in some senses. He is, I would say, Marek is a bit of a cunt at times. I think it's fair to say, like, he is, because he's very blunt and direct. But because they're old friends, it's obviously part of their dynamic. And actually, Jan is, happy to accept that criticism. He's comfortable enough in his decision. He's not hiding from civilization, I don't think, because he's comfortable he kind of coos over the magazines that Marek brings back from this kind of enlightened America, like the car adverts he looks at, and he's comfortable to look at them. He even drives Marek's car and has loads of fun.
Capitalist paraphernalia.
He's like, wow, they're geometrical, he says, which isn't the first time that, like, the idea of geometry, crystalline structure is used as a visual and intellectual metaphor in this film, obviously in the title itself. And I think Marek, obviously, and his wife Anna, and we also understand they have a couple of kids, but the kids are kind of introduced, I think, and dismissed quite quickly, or they might just be school kids. There's a bit of beginning. I don't think it's that important.
And also his dad is hanging around, right? This old dude.
I think, is that Anna's dad? His wife's dad?
Oh, right, yeah, it might be that. See, really...
Yeah, I like the dad. It doesn't really say anything. And they have a wonderful dynamic, like the dad, Anna, and Jan. They kind of, like, fool around. This isn't like... Okay, so my main parallel with watching this film is as a couple. One of those is Chekhov, and Chekhov is invoked directly at one point in the film by Marek, and they're sitting around the dinner table and not talking. I think one of them's just playing cards while someone's reading. It's very silent, drinking tea, and Marek starts making these pointed observations to go, oh, it's just like a Chekhov plate. The only thing we're missing is the samovar. And it's great, and it's a great moment, and he's like, and Anna's, sort of kind of like toys with him a bit, and then Jan says, don't you like Chekhov? And he's like, it's very boring, it's very depressing. And he's really dismissive of their really lovely way of life and their contentment. And there's that invocation of Chekhov, and Chekhov obviously, like, almost suffocates, like, the Eastern European imagination about the rural life, because this is basically the plot, kind of a really simplified version of Uncle Vanya, where you've got this academic from the city who is this upstart adjutant, and then you've got these peaceful people. You've got Sonia and Vanya and the granddad and stuff in Uncle Vanya. So there's this kind of way that, would you say that, Marek is pushing their contentment, and he's almost like he's a scientist trying to understand it. Would you say that's fair? And in what ways does he do that?
Well, yeah, he does. One moment that's quite memorable, actually, is when he's talking to Jan. Is it Jan or Jan? I don't know.
Let's just alternate between Jan and Jan. That's what I'm doing.
That's fine. It doesn't matter really. Jan's wife is I think she's called Anna. I can't remember.
Anna, yeah.
And there's a conversation where Anna asks Marek about his love life, and he sort of says, "Oh, it's marriage isn't for me, He sort of gives the impression that he's a bit of a Lothario, but like that he's a bit of a mess, really. That he's sort of not really, just has commitment problems. And at that point, I think you see a kind of friction, and you see a little bit of the dream. There are two different paradigms being lived out, and Marek feels very resigned to his. In many moments, you feel that Marek's is experiencing exterior validation, but kind of inner turmoil, whereas for Jan and his family, the inner and the interior and the exterior are kind of in harmony.
They are in harmony, and that's the metaphor again of the crystal. Crystal is this perfectly harmonious, organic, natural structure, which all life tends towards. And there's an interesting scene where Marek gives a lecture in a sort of local community hall, sort of presenting the findings from his research to this kind of mildly disinterested audience, but whatever. And he gives this slide presentation, and he's talking about his research, and it's the first time we really understand in a kind of direct way what he does. And his research involves artificially creating crystals, and I think it's kind of a nicely on the nose metaphor, really, that he is interested in the propagation of artificial beauty and harmony, whereas the implication is that Jan, Anna, and the villagers and so on are naturally crystalline and naturally harmonious and perfect. And he sort of says this line sweet. Where he's like, and it's like, it's an interesting bit where he's like, he says in the lecture, one day, he says, we've overcome nature, which in its ways, he's actually kind of parroting a particularly Soviet predisposition, that nature has been conquered by man. He says this. And I don't think for a minute this is like a subtly anti-communist film. Fuck all, no way is it like that. But he kind of says this position, which wouldn't be unusual for a scientist to hold, this view, I suppose. And he says, one day we will be able to create crystals that are more beautiful than those that come from the earth. So in a very direct way, he's an artificer of, created fictional beauty. And obviously, as we learn, this is a process that's ongoing. They haven't perfected it yet. And I suppose the argument is that natural crystals will always be more beautiful. And he says salt, naturally salt, if left alone, will crystallize. Salt of the earth, maybe. So I think there's these, obviously these tensions explored at a kind of scientific and intellectual level. And it kind of comes to a head because Marek pushes and prods. And I mean, maybe the one time that Jan claps back is this line that kind of resonates, actually, and I've been thinking about a lot, is when he says to Marek, he says, haven't you ever considered that taking a breath is the proper way to live? So the idea, he's taken a step out from the heady rush of metropolitan life, and he's like, well, maybe that is what we're supposed to do.
It reminds me of a quote from Marshall Rosenberg, the nonviolent communication guru, where it's about mindfulness, and he says, one of the chapter headings is, don't just do something, stand there. Which I love.
That's really
I've
good.
I've got a post-it note above my desk that says that, and it's helpful.
I've got this beautiful image of you standing there in the morning, invoking it under your breath. Because there is a sense of that, because again, is Jan is teaching, so Anna is a primary school teacher, and he's teaching her some sort of advanced science and so on. And there's a really sweet scene where they're just kind of studying together, and she asks about entropy, and asks Jan to sort of explain entropy. And he explains it as a calming down. And so the implication again is that this is a kind of entropic way of life, which is the natural, as it were, the natural progress of all matter is towards entropy. All life will persist towards entropy, a state of entropy. So in a way, again, it's another way of saying that Marek is kind of artificial. And I don't think that, when I was watching it, I was like, again, I don't think Zanussi is saying that we're supposed to dislike Marek. He has disagreeable qualities, but it's almost like we're not supposed to again see them as these starkly opposed character types, because he's actually a human. We're just supposed to think that maybe he's actually, like you said, he's got inner turmoil probably, and I think it expresses himself like a lot of people with inner turmoil. He kind of lashes out rather than looks inwards. So there's a point where he tries to seduce Anna, doesn't he?
Yes. Which I was gunning for him the whole way. I was like, come on, steal his wife. Why not? Come on. The boss move, But depraved.
This is like pure
very cruel, horrible
alpha
thing to do to someone. Yeah, it's
horrible,
funny.
horrible. This is pure alpha behavior.
I lived through that ambivalence.
Did you recently?
No. I mean, watching the film.
I know. You're projecting, yeah. But it's a good, yeah. It's a good. It's an interesting scene, isn't it? Because she obviously rebuffs him, but he's obviously trying to steal the kiss. Not because I don't think he's interested in her. I think he's just again trying to upset the apple cart because he can.
I think he's actually upset by like how comfortable and easy their love is, and I think that's very understandable.
Yes,
I think when you sort of when all you know is kind of struggle and want and like contradiction, which I think someone who grows up in communist Poland and then goes off to work in the West probably feels deeply contradictory all the time. I think there's an element of like almost a desire to infect others, to be like, well, like why can't you see what I've seen? Why can't you come and live this? It's like when you've seen something a bit gruesome and you want to tell your friend about it just so that you're not the only one who knows of it. I think there's a loneliness in Marek that he wants to
share his kind of worldly successes, which he sees as external validation, like you said, and he wants to
but in a sense
them.
he wants to transmit that difficulty to his he said it frustrates him that someone could just be content without that, but actually in a way probably there's some sense of regret that he hasn't been able to find contentment,
because they don't care really. This is a nice thing, like I said, Jan kind of picks these things up and he's content enough in his life. It's not like he's going to disintegrate if he sees an American car advert and escape to the West. He's not like that. He's very much comfortable in his convictions. There's a scene where they're looking at photographs that there's two scenes with photographs actually, and photographs play an interesting role structurally and editorially in the film in a few places, but there's a kind of diegetic photographs where they're looking at these little clips, snaps he's obviously taken in America, and they're looking at them, and for him he's showing off that he's seen the world, but they're kind of more having fun with using this little mini handheld projector, and they keep holding it the wrong way around, and they're kind of playing with it, and it kind of really means nothing to them. It's just a toy. So his worldly successes and his accolades are just fucking toys to them, but not in a cruel way. They're just like, oh, it's just a bit of fun. They don't really care, and they're not impressed. They just care about him as a person. And I think you have that, and I think it kind of comes to a head when we learn something a little bit not morbid, but a little bit dark about Marek's scientific background. Do you know what I'm referring to?
No, I've forgotten. I've watched two films since I saw this film.
Jesus. This is the... You are voracious, it's good.
Just tell me the plot detail. It'll come back to me when you tell it.
Okay, so it's when he's talking about his research that led to his breakthroughs that he's celebrated for, and it turns out that he had kind of implied that he'd kind of stolen the research from somebody else or had not assisted somebody, and Jan puts it in very stark terms. He says, you stabbed him in the back.
Yeah. And
it's like this guy's kind of... I don't think he stole research, but someone else was doing it at the same time, and he didn't share his findings, and he kind of took the credit, and that's the basis of his career in a way, has been this kind of intellectual, kind of selfish act of intellectual selfishness. Whereas Jan is really happy to share, and Jan's, obviously does his meteorological experiments, which look really fun, taking measurements and stuff. And he also plays around making this little synth light bulb machine. Do you remember? And he's just like, I just like soldering.
He's such a loser, Jan, man.
Yeah, he's such a beta cuck. as they say.
No, but I mean that's the kind of beauty of it. I mean that's this might be a good moment to sort of widen it out to talking about films that depict male friendship generally. I know that like it's funny because like with this, like that's a theme I'm very interested in generally, because it's not something that there are more films probably about female friendship than there are about male friendship.
Yeah.
Overall,
well,
what did I like romance generally, but
well, what did I tell you? This is male Francis Ha. It totally is, but there's very much this is very much like this like you said, this genre of, I think it's quite much more normal to see a film about friendship among women and perhaps not for men, I think. But weirdly, like the parallel that I was thinking of was Winter Light, like Bergman's Winter Light.
Wow.
Which I think is like the counterpart to this film, in that they share certain preoccupations. They're fundamentally about the relationship between two people. So, you know, in Winter Light, it's with the teacher and the priest or whatever. And you've got that dynamic. And in Winter Light, which is obviously 1963, you know, the Winter Light is like the dark brother of this film, whereas this film is fun and light.
Such an interesting double bill, wouldn't it? Ingmar Bergman's Winter Light and
Zanussi Structure of Crystal. Because I think Winter Light is, again, you've got the character going through this deep existential malaise, but he's asking, how can I live in a world where like nuclear war is possible? Like my death stands before me, and
so that's the guy Johann Persson who visits the priest. But the priest, they both have crises, and one of them, this is not a spoiler, one of them kills himself really early in the film. And it's, God, Winter Light is just, it's one of my favourite films of all time, but it is like
100%, but it's so bleak.
It's fucking cold.
Do you agree? Do you see the kind of parallel?
I do. I'm struggling, but it's piecing itself together for me.
I just think there's like this interplay between two characters, and in Winter Light they're inconsolable. They can't, these two people cannot reach out and help each other, whereas here they kind of, despite their intellectual differences, their bond of friendship and empathy unites them still. It's quite a positive film. There's nothing really cynical about Structure of Crystal.
They are gentle with each other. I mean, now I think about him trying to get off with the guy's wife. I suppose, somewhat undermines what I'm saying. But like, there is all the playful. I think that's just cinema. I think in a way, like him making a pass at the guy's wife is like the cinematic way of depicting the fact that like he was probably looking at his friend's wife's bum a lot, which is
literally that. Because he's coveting like you said, this easy, comfortable love they have.
Yeah, like he's thinking, what if this was my life, like.
Yeah,
and he sees,
and it shows he
tries to sort of grab it, but he can't grab it because it's actually a lifestyle. You know, you can never grab a lifestyle. You have to dedicate the hours to it. You know,
can't grab the lifestyle.
You have to live the lifestyle. You can't just like switch to it.
Yeah,
you have to cultivate it.
You have to cultivate the lifestyle, and he can't understand that because he's, again, treating it kind of like a scientist. He's treating it like a scientific research that he conceives, like a car he could buy in America. It's something that won't yield to his desire. And then there's really interesting things because he's constantly like confused by Jan, even though they love each other as friends. You know, they're deeply committed to each other. They obviously got these deep bonds, right? But he continually questions why Jan does stuff, and it's like they go on this walk to this cemetery, and Jan kind of brushes the snow from this grave, and Marek's like, "Why do you do that if you don't know the person?" It's just like, whatever. It just doesn't matter because he's a creature of pure presence, and it's like I can't remember it. There's quite a kind of pithy inscription on the gravestone, isn't there? That's like a kind of memento mori thing. It's like, but it's kind of an acceptance of the infinite and acceptance of death, because that creep up quite a few times. You know, where like Jan is reading a lot of philosophy and kind of talks. I think he's looking at like Thomas Aquinas and stuff like that. He's showing him philosophy, and he's really been thinking about the infinite and man's place, in a world where we will all die and that's inevitable. But he's comfortable with that, whereas Marek just gets really like confused and kind of dismissive and bored, and he's like, I don't have time to think about this. He's, you know, living life so
you can
fast,
meditate when you're
think
dead
about
is something he says at one point.
Yeah,
I
does he actually say that? Oh,
yeah. I mean, it's very I think he says that. Maybe I'm pretty sure he's in the scene about breath.
There is. Yeah, let's just go with that. That's in the film.
Everything I've ever said is in this film. The other film actually I wanted to mention was My Dinner with Andre by Louis Malle, which is sort of most notable for being this 2-hour dinner conversation between Wallace Shawn and Andre Gregory, two giants of theatre and I suppose cinema.
And a very, very niche joke in an episode of The Simpsons as well.
Yeah, I haven't seen that. I probably have seen that before I saw the film.
It's turned into an arcade machine that I think.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
it's
good. I'll send it to you.
So beautiful. Send it to me. Yeah. But I love that. So My Dinner with Andre is these two theatre guys that meet up, and one of them's been all around the world, and he's done exercises with Grotowski. He's gone to the Finnish hills to do some eccentric performance art practice where he gets buried alive. And Wallace Shawn the whole time has just been hanging out with his girlfriend and like working on plays in New York where they both now live, and Andre makes these grand statements about the world and the sort of sickening effects of modernity and all these things that honestly, like, there are so many films, like Patrick Keeler's London falls into this category, like where old men moan about how sickening modernity is in the 20th century when modernity was far less sickening than it is now.
But
like,
it's also
I'm like, dude, have you seen Twitter? Like, you're complaining about like there being a fucking advert in your newspaper? Gee.
Little do you know what's around the corner. It's like that meme which is like, oh, you complain about society yet you live in society. It's that fucking meme, isn't it? But it's a good parallel.
My Dinner with Andre. They're both close friends, and Wallace Shawn sort of has his jaw open for most of the conversation because he's sort of he something's changed about his friend, and he finds it slightly alienating, but he's also immensely curious, and he also sort of knows that this is a thing that will always happen with his friend, that his friend will want to venture outwards, and that he won't. And there's at the end of My Dinner with Andre, Wallace Shawn goes. He gets the cab home, and he looks on all the streets in New York, and he remembers like how they fit into his childhood, and he sort of reflects on the fact that he's always been in New York and that he probably always will be.
Yeah, it's probably the perfect like companion piece in a way.
Also, Women in Love by Ken Russell. Which is my favourite film about male friendship, and
I haven't seen that in a long time.
Oh, you've got to. I mean, obviously the naked wrestling scene is very famous, but I mean, it's a weird gripe to have, but like people always describe the naked wrestling scene as like homoerotic or gay, and it's kind of funny because they in Brazil they censored it. So that
which suddenly makes it homoerotic when it wasn't before.
It went straight from the two men like undressing by the fire to them like breathing heavily like on the floor, whereas like I've seen it. Whereas in the uncensored version, like you see them wrestle naked, and it's not, they don't have sex. It's like it's not in my view it's not homoerotic, it's just like it's two guys fighting, which is fun. It's just great fun.
Intimacy. It's great fun. There's that intimacy in Structured Crystal as well, with their play fighting, with their friendly competition, and we learn that's essential. That's obviously an integral dynamic to their friendship, this competition. But whereas for Jan it is simply a forgettable thing, an event in life. For Marek, this is like this all-consuming ambition is to compete and to push and to prod and to question and to challenge. And again, Zanussi isn't telling us that is bad. We're just seeing that maybe that is not a path to contentment and joy. And we see that, Marek finds all these ways to kind of chip away at Jan's armor, but again, Jan is too content and too secure in his convictions and his belief to be disturbed. And obviously it takes on this spiritual dimension, not just because obviously God is everywhere in this film, or at least a sense of the infinite. And Marek continually calls Jan a kind of holy fool, almost like that kind of type character from
cruel.
Russian literature. Yeah, it is. It's bad, man. And he calls him a saint, and he says you're living in a kind of cynical, kind of snide way. He says you're living the life of a saint. You're living a stoic existence. And he believes that, like I said, Jan is wasting the best years of his life. But obviously the things that Marek holds on to, all these little contests and antagonisms, Jan doesn't care about. Right at the beginning that they're looking at photos, and Marek says, do you remember we argued at this time? And Jan says, no, I don't remember. And he's like, when was it? And Marek's like, 1950s. And he's like, oh yeah, April 1955. And he just remembered the fucking month. He remembers everything. He's obviously not let this go, this kind of pointless argument. And Jan's just like, yeah, I don't remember at all, whatever, and just moves on. Like, he's so unfazed by the past. But not completely, because we do learn the event that precipitated Jan moving to the countryside was potentially an accident that may have happened during a mountaineering expedition of some sort. And it's mentioned really briefly. And he spent 6 months in bed, in a kind of hospital confinement, and then kind of retired from science and became a meteorologist in the countryside. And we learn this, obviously, this crucial moment in his life led to a period of deep reflection and led him to change the way he lived, and to abandon Warsaw, and to abandon science and abandon a way of life. And we kind of see some still images of mountains. Do you remember that?
Yes, the mountains have a sort of haunting.
Yeah, it's kind of haunting, but then that's it, and he's not consumed by that. It was obviously a crucial moment, like lever or bridge in his life, but he's not consumed by it. It marked a change in his life, and he's content now on the other side of it, and he doesn't revisit it. Whereas Marek is all about revisiting shit in his life. He is a messy bitch, as we would say, and he is constantly. No, go on.
I'm very impressed by this film's ability to talk about the past without being like being too verbal or telling too much. There's an immense, almost, I think, because you can tell it's a first feature, because there's it's almost like quite pointed, the attempts made to be visual. Like there are all these the play fighting and stuff, and there's just lots of activities that are are engaged in to make sure that their friendship is played out through visuality rather than through words. But it's fucking vital, because a lot of the film is about stuff that has happened in the past. So that's navigated really well through these kind of, like you said earlier, about how they look at the photos, and how the action of looking at the photos becomes more interesting than the photos themselves, or things like that.
There are all these kind of, like you say, quite dynamic, physical, embodied moments which explore or kind of let us glimpse their past without flashbacks, or without, because we're only seeing these 6 weeks. He's staying with him for 6 weeks, which is a fucking long time.
It's very lockdown.
Anyway,
I noticed that all the films we've reviewed have been very lockdown. Like High Life being stuck in space, Bacurau being in a village that gets shut off from life, Black Power mixtape we just did for virtue signaling, and Love is Love is about
stuck in a relationship, consuming love. Yeah. I think so. Yeah. It's interesting. Maybe all films are about forms of imprisonment, or we're projecting our current imprisonment on the films we're choosing. I don't know.
I think the latter is true. Should we draw it to a close? I'm conscious that we've hit 40.
I think so. We've hit 40 minutes. There was one thing I was going to say, and it felt really poignant, but maybe I'll be like Jan and I'll just let it go.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
You can't just do that. That's number one rule of broadcasting. Don't tell people you're going to say something and then not say it.
Avoid something.
The audience,
okay, I'll tell you.
The audience will grasp.
They won't like it. Our huge readership audience will abandon us. No, there's one thing I liked, which is a kind of subtle thing about composition and about the aesthetics of this film, which was the music, actually. And there's that. I realised that Marek's kind of associated with jazz. He constantly puts the radio on. There's lots of jazz, and then at the very end of the film, when he fucks off back to Warsaw, and Jan goes out into the snow, and he looks through his telescope and he's just happy studying the stars. We suddenly get some classical music playing, which had begun at the beginning of the film. And the piece is kind of restored, like Marek fucks off and Jan's life continues like a patient stream. And I think it's a very nice little nod. I like the association of characters with particular music. It's very Peter and the Wolf.
Well, yes, I mean, its roots are in opera and one must be rooted in traditions.
One must.
Did you say you had a quote to play us out?
Yeah, do you know what? I had this, it's longish, so we can cut it. But we were talking about Chekhov, right? And at the end of Uncle Vanya, we should say actually very quickly that Marek does not manage to convince Jan to return to the city, which is what he's trying to do the whole time. Jan's like, no.
Which is hardly a surpriser because it's very unsurprising. It's hardly a spoiler because it's highly unsurprising.
He's not convincing. But I kind of wanted to read the end of Uncle Vanya because it's when it's pretty much just Sonia and Uncle Vanya left on their own. And I think this must have been in Chekhov was on the curriculum, at least in the Soviet Union. So he's definitely read and seen this play probably tens of times. But should we do it? Shall I read the final monologue from Sonia, which kind of encapsulates in a very depressing way what's been going on between Anna and Jan?
Perfect way to check off.
We fucking well done. I should have done that. Okay. What can we do? We must live our lives. Yes, we shall live, Uncle Vanya. We shall live through the long procession of days before us and through the long evenings. We shall patiently bear the trials that fate imposes on us. We shall work for others without rest, both now and when we are old. And when our last hour comes, we shall meet it humbly, and there, beyond the grave, we shall say that we have suffered and wept, that our life was bitter, and God will have pity on us. Ah, then, dear, dear uncle, we shall see that bright and beautiful life. We shall rejoice and look back upon our sorrow here, a tender smile, and we shall rest. I have faith, uncle, fervent, passionate faith. We shall rest, we shall rest, we shall hear the angels, we shall see heaven shining like a jewel. We shall see all evil and all our pain sink away in the great compassion that shall enfold the world. Our life will be as peaceful and tender and sweet as a caress. I have faith. You have never known what happiness was, but wait, Uncle Vanya, wait. We shall rest. We shall rest. We shall rest.
Thank you very much, Sharon. Thank you for listening, everyone.
Thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye.